Andrew Bixler used this microphone on Sunday, and he has a different shaped ear than me. There we go. Cool. All right, so what is it? I don't think it has to be that loud. I think it's just loud. Yeah, we good? Yeah, yeah, we can stay down there. That's good. Yeah. Or not stay down there. Wait, what's going on? That's really weird. Okay, I'm going to keep talking. And guys, can you give Ben a big round of applause? Ben is back there. I don't know if you know this, but every week Ben is back there and he is running sound or he is running media. Tonight, Josh is running media, so thank you, Josh, for... if you would like to help out, I'm just using this time to talk, and if you would like to help out with that, fill out one of those cards over there on the shelf, and Ben would love to train you. Ben would love a week off every now and then to not have to be back there. So that would be awesome. We're good? We're good? Seems a little loud still. I think that I can talk louder than that, so that would be good. Awesome. All right. Thank you, Ben. I love to mountain bike. I did it when I was younger, in my late teens and early 20s, and I loved it. And then I had kids. And when you have kids, they are a little bit all-consuming. They take a lot of your time and attention. And so I had mountain biked for years. And then recently, I got a new mountain bike. And I love it. I love going down hills and over rocks and, through puddles and all those things. And, it's so much fun. It's fantastic. You know what I do not love about mountain biking? Falling's not even actually that bad. Here's why I say that. I have no adventure in my life. So the fact that I might live on the edge a little bit and fall off a mountain. Yeah, that's kind of exciting for me. So I don't even mind the falling down part as much. What I do not like about mountain biking, the uphill. It is so much work. I start riding, and then my legs start burning, and then it gets hard to breathe, and I do not like going uphill. Well, guess what? I figured out how to eliminate suffering from mountain biking. Here's how we do it. My friend Larry and I, we drive to a place and we park a car at the bottom. We put our bikes into his truck and drive to the top, ride down, get back in the car, drive to the top, and pick up the car we left at the top. It's awesome. All I have to do is ride downhill. I get to go fast. I get to splash through creeks. I get to go over rocks, and there's none of the suffering. So I started doing that. And then recently, we went riding at a different place. And what do you think I had to do? I had to ride uphill. And suddenly, my genius plan to try and avoid suffering backfired on me. Because I had been to this place before, and I used to I can ride up this. This isn't a problem. I was ready to do it. This time, because I'd only been riding downhill for the last several weeks, I'm halfway up the hill, and both Larry and I are just like, we should sell the bikes. We should just give them away to charity or do something, And it was bad because we had not gone through what we needed to do to be able to handle a situation that, of course, we were at some point not going to be able to avoid. We can't always drive to the top of the mountain and just ride downhill. There's just it just doesn't work that way. And so while we had tried to avoid suffering and were successful for a while, it catches up with us, right? Inevitably, suffering takes place and catches up. And we as people, we want to avoid suffering, right? We are a sufferingless people. If we can get around suffering, that's what we want to do. If we can bypass hard work and just get to the reward, we tend to like to do that, right? Am I the only one in the room who would prefer not suffering? I am not. I am not. It's going to happen. We would rather, but when it comes to our life and suddenly there's suffering, there's something that we don't like, all of a sudden now we're in a place where we demand an answer. We demand to know why this had to happen to me, why this had to happen to my friend. And a lot of times we turn that on God. We go, okay, God, if you're really there, how could you let this happen? How can you allow suffering to take place if you're so good? And we get really hung up on that. For some, it's a roadblock to faith. People are going, look, it's not that I hate God. I just don't understand how a good God, who's loving, who says he cares for me, why he would allow suffering like this to happen. And we're in this series, Roadblocks, where we're asking these questions because we don't need to dodge these. We don't need to dodge these difficult questions because the Bible doesn't dodge these questions. The Bible speaks to this stuff. And it's important for us to know so that we can grow in our faith, because even if you're here tonight and you're going, look, I believe in God, I'm cool, but when you hit a time in your life where things get hard, it's not that you abandon your faith, but you may get to a point where you go, well, okay, but I can only believe God up to a point. I can only trust God up to a point. So if you're here tonight and you would call yourself a Christian, you would call yourself a believer, this could be a really important time for you to allow God to reveal himself in a way that he's not just trustworthy up to a point or in certain situations. He is trustworthy. He is good. If you're here tonight and you are like, I don't believe any of this stuff, and this is one of the reasons why, I'm really glad that you're here. Because I believe that there are things that God has revealed to us and things that we need to consider. And I said this last week, talking about this for 25 minutes, I'm not looking to woo you into believing. I'm not looking to just convince you, and I'm going to answer every question that you have in your mind. I'm not going to be able to do it. But I hope that what you are here tonight with is an openness to maybe ask some questions that you are afraid to ask. To consider some things about the way that you've been approaching God and thinking about this idea of suffering, and considering that maybe you've been thinking about it wrong or coming at it from an angle that's not getting you anywhere. It's just, you keep hitting this wall. So I want to pray before we go any further, because this is really one of those things. I really don't want to be in the way of what God wants to do. I really don't want this to be, oh, well, Jeff said so, so I'll believe it. Or Jeff didn't say it the right way, so I'm not going to believe it. I want this to be something that I believe God will speak to us. So Lord, we're here and I surrender to you. I ask you to give me your words and your heart, and that this would go the way you want it to go. God, that you would reveal yourself to us, that we would draw closer to you, that we'd have a deeper understanding of who you are. He just couldn't take it anymore. He'd had enough. One friend after another was killed in senseless acts of violence. Wrong place, wrong time. Undeserving. And he was going to funeral after funeral after funeral. He just couldn't take it anymore. His brother and their family invested some money with a guy to start up a business, and the guy took off with all the money, leaving the family destitute, having a hard time even putting food on the table. He couldn't take it anymore. The guy who got drunk and killed his daughter was going to get off on a technicality. And he couldn't take it anymore. And he goes to God. He finds a quiet, alone space. And he paces back and forth. The rage, the sick. He had lost so much, and none of it made any sense. He just wanted to vomit. And as he paces back and forth, just trying to get the words, he had spent most of his life being religious. He'd spent most of his life going to church and knew all the right things to say and knew who God was and all these things. And finally, he just couldn't take it anymore. And how dare you? How could you do this when I have followed you? How could you do this when I have tried my hardest? And you let people die? You let people be killed? You let families go hungry? For what? Are you not good enough? Are you not powerful enough? Do you not care? How can you just let this go? How can you let people who are breaking the law get off on a technicality? I thought you hated injustice. I thought you would defend us. I thought you loved us and you wanted to care for us, that if we followed you, you would be my God. Where are you now? And it sounded just like this. And he waited. Figured God hadn't responded before. God hadn't fixed any of his problems when one thing went wrong, and he went to him and he's like, hey, God, how about a little help? And he waited. On the other end of that conversation, God is really glad that he came to him. See, this guy had the guts to be real. Forget all the religious stuff. Forget the fancy prayers. This guy shook his fist at God and he said, how dare you? And God loves him. God is so glad that he came to him rather than deciding that he wasn't there. God understands. God understands why he's ticked. Life is hard. Things didn't go the way he planned. He had tried to do all the right things and things weren't panning out. What happened? I thought we had a deal here. I go to youth group, you bless me. I go to church, you make things go right. I don't do these things and these things and these things. Well, you help me get the job I want. You help me find the person that I'm supposed to marry. My life is good. He understands he's ticked. He understands that from where he's at, God understands from where he's at, this doesn't make any sense. And that he feels very alone. But God is not offended. God is not upset and saying, how dare you talk to me like that? In fact, it's only at that point, after he has gone to God in a very real way, that God speaks. God says to him, look around you. You're going to be utterly amazed. For I am going to do something in your life that you wouldn't believe even if I told you. I'm going to do something in your life that you wouldn't believe even if I told you. That's a true story. You can read that story. You can read that interaction with God, and for some of you, it would do you a whole lot of good. It's in the Bible. It's in this little book that you probably have skipped right over in the Old Testament named Habakkuk. Habakkuk was a prophet. God had spoken to Habakkuk before. Habakkuk was in a place where he was like, hey, me and God, we're like this, we're good. And then his life just goes right down the toilet. Why does God allow suffering? Here's something I want you to consider. Why does God allow suffering? It leads us down a wrong path. It leads us down a path of thinking that isn't going to get you where you want it to take you. It's not going to answer the question that you really want answered. And yet this is one of the most common things that we go to God and we want to know. God, why did you let that little 12-year-old boy get hit on campus or on 24th? Why did you let that guy at my school get in that car accident and be killed? Why did you let my parents get divorced? Why did you let me get raped? And it brings us to this place where we demand an answer, but what it really does is puts us in this place of having to decide whether we agree with what God did or not. It puts us in a place when we ask, why did you let that happen? Imagine God answered you. Imagine for whatever, any of those questions. Imagine if you said, why did you let that happen? And God said, you want to know why? Here's why. Is there any answer God could give you that would make you go, oh, well, in that case, I'm good with that? Any? Not for any of the situations that I just mentioned. We are put into a place where we have to decide whether we actually agree with God or not. And there is no answer in so many of these cases that God would be able to give us that would make us okay. So we're asking the wrong question. We want so badly to know why God let that happen when the truth is we wouldn't believe it if he told us. It wouldn't be okay with us even if he told us. God has worked in all kinds of ways throughout history. And you can read so many of these instances in the Bible, ways that God has worked. And we know it was God. I mean, God has given us proof that it was God that we would not be okay with. Things that God allowed that we're just like, you shouldn't have allowed that. Things that God facilitated. People were in place. He didn't stop things from happening. He didn't intervene. That we just go, what? That, and we point at that, and we go, that's not a good God. Because you let that happen, and we look at the instance, because we disagree with what God's doing. So it leads us down this wrong path. Why do you allow suffering? It leads us down this path where you're not going to get to where you want to go. You're not going to get that answer because for some of the suffering that you guys have been through, there is nothing God could tell me, let alone you, about why he allowed that to take place that I'd be okay with. In fact, it might make me more angry if we believe that that instance and that action and that thing that we had to go through is the end. What if instead of asking, why does God allow suffering? What would change if we asked this? Do I believe that God can work in this situation? Do I believe? Okay, all right, I'm going to give God the I'm already angry at him, so I must believe in him. Okay, I must have some sort of faith. All right, God, fine. You don't have to tell me why you did it, because I probably wouldn't understand and I probably wouldn't agree with it and don't think it should have happened. But do I believe that God can work in this situation? Or do I believe that things have gotten massively out of control and God is now no longer capable of intervening, no longer capable of being good? And I'm going to end up stuck. Do you believe that God is able to work in a situation in your life? This is a conversation that I have with grieving families when I've buried their children. They come into my office absolutely shredded. They have nothing left. And they sit down and they go, why would God do this? You know what my answer to them is every single time? I don't know. I wish that there was something that I could do that would heal you. But this is so beyond anything that I could do. I wish there was an answer that I could give you that would make you go, oh, well, in that case, my son being killed in a car accident was worth it. But there isn't. That leaves me, a person who believes that God is good, a person who believes that God is powerful, a person who believes that God is in control and able to intervene, able to only go one place. God let it happen. Do I believe God will follow through with his promise and be able to work in this situation? So I tell families, I don't know. I don't know why your son had to die that way. I don't know why your daughter was able to get so far down the path and become a heroin addict and overdose. But if you ask me the next question, do I believe God can be at work? I do. Do I believe that God can bring healing? I do. Do I believe that God can bring life out of death, out of the most tragic situations? I do. Is it going to happen tomorrow? I hope so. But if it doesn't, I still believe God can be at work. We need to understand something, because a lot of times we make suffering personal. Why is God allowing this to happen to me? Did I do something wrong? I did miss youth group 2 weeks in a row. I did. And so suddenly God is punishing. We need to understand and just acknowledge this truth. None of us are exempt from suffering. Anybody in this room suffer? Raise your hand if you've suffered. Okay, look around. 100% of us. Okay, none of us are exempt from suffering. Not even Jesus was exempt from suffering. You realize that? He didn't just suffer on the cross. That's something that we all, would look at and go, well, yeah, he died on the cross, but ultimately that's what he was supposed to do. No, he suffered before then. In fact, he suffered at a time God had just declared. Jesus was baptized, and God out loud said, "This is my son, in whom I'm well pleased." Do you know what the very next thing God did to Jesus was? Nope. Sent him out into the wilderness. He went out into the desert where he starved, he had no water, and he was tempted by Satan. You could look at that and be like, oh, God didn't love Jesus. Did God love Jesus? Yep. None of us are exempt from suffering. God knew that this was part of what Jesus was going to need to go through to demonstrate his love for us, to demonstrate authentically that Jesus was his son. And so God looked at that and went, this is what needs to happen, and there's going to be suffering. There's going to be hurt. And Jesus had to walk through that. There was no getting out of it. There was no getting around it. But sometimes, how can you let that happen is a dilemma of perspective. We look at it from our point of view and we decide whether or not, from what we see, is this worth it? And a lot of times we go, it's not worth it. Get me out of this right now, in this second. God, if you are good, you will remove this hurt and this suffering from my life. But what if we don't have the perspective that's going to lead us to life? What if we don't have the perspective that God has? And if God has a big plan, what if we don't know something that God knows? Jesus had the opportunity to have a dilemma of perspective. See, while he was out suffering in the desert, while God was not loving him, letting him suffer out in the desert, Satan came to him. And Satan said, hey, JC, take a look. You see that? You see this vast expanse of land? You see the mountains? You see, the cities? Just all of it can be yours. All of it. You can end your suffering right now if you take me up on my offer. Now, from Jesus' perspective, what do you think sounded best? Continue to wander the desert and suffer, or take Satan up on his offer? Take Satan up on his offer, right? What, I get to end my suffering right now? Deal. We do that, don't we? Or we wish we could. Jesus, recognizing he did not have the perspective of the Father, but willing to trust the perspective of the Father, told Satan, no deal. Are you willing to trust the perspective of the Father? Was Jesus suffering any less because he was trusting the perspective of the Father? No. It still stunk to be Jesus in that moment. And it would stink again. But his perspective, he recognized, no. I need to be who my Father sent me to be. In our lives, from our perspective, we can look at it and go, this suffering, this thing that I'm going through, deal breaker. Unless you're humble enough, and I think it takes humility. It takes some arrogance to go, nope, I know what's best. Are you humble enough to go, I may not have the full picture. I may not have the complete plan. God may be doing something that I wouldn't even believe if he told me. So, do I believe that God can be at work even in my suffering? Not why are you doing this, but do I believe that God can be at work? Habakkuk screams out to God, says, how could you? What are you doing? And God tells him, you wouldn't believe it if I told you. But guess what? God tells Habakkuk, because here's what's going to happen. Your life and the life of the people around you is going to be filled with pain. It's going to be filled with suffering. Injustice is going to run rampant. You think your life is hard right now? Wait until this nation over here overtakes you and makes you their slaves. You haven't suffered yet. And guess what? I'm going to let it happen. Not the answer Habakkuk was looking for, right? This is what happened to Grandpa God, right? I thought you were going to what? You're kidding me, right? How could you let this happen? Not just let it happen, how could you facilitate it? You've put us in a place where we're vulnerable. You've put us in a place where they're going to overrun us. How could you? Oh, and yeah, I'm supposed to trust you. And this is where Habakkuk gets a little snooty. He goes, fine. I'm supposed to trust you? I'll trust you. I'm going to stay right here, and I'm going to watch. It says, he said, I'm going to climb up on my watchtower, which is where people would get up to look and be able to see their whole property and see out into the hills so they could see if an attack was coming. He goes, I'm going to get up on my watchtower, and I'm going to watch, and I'm going to expect to see you move. You want me to trust you? Fine. I'm trusting you. I'm going to trust you right into the ground. I'm going to trust you through every situation. I'm going to trust you as I see my life disintegrate. I'm going to trust you when unfair things happen. I'm going to trust you when things happen to me personally that I don't deserve. I'm going to trust you even when my life goes bad, even though I go to church, even though I pray, even though I do all the Christian things. I'm going to trust you no matter what, because you said you're going to move. Fine. I'm waiting. And he waited. He shook his fist at God, and he dared God. But rather than continuing down that path of, God, why are you allowing this to happen? Why are you allowing suffering? He goes, well, you're allowing it. I'm going to trust you and trust that you say you're going to bring life out of it. I'm going to watch and see. I'm going to see what you can do. And I'll trust you. Because remember, why would you allow suffering as a dilemma of perspective? Habakkuk realized that his perspective was not necessarily God's perspective. And that God may be doing something. In fact, God told him, I'm going to do something in your life and in your nation you wouldn't believe if I told you. And if I did tell you, which he did, you'd get mad. Which Habakkuk did. And God said, see, I told you. Fast forward to after Jesus. A guy named Paul, who was one of the ones who inflicted pain on Christians, became a believer himself. And Paul had the nerve to say this to a group of people in Rome who were suffering, who were being executed, put into prison. He had the nerve to say this: I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing to the glory that will be revealed in us. Kind of sounds like he's going, hey, whatever you're going through, no big deal. One day you'll get to go to heaven. Right? Or, hey, don't worry about it. And he's saying this from, his condo on the beach. More money than he knows what to do with. And that his perspective is like, oh, he's just checked out. In reality, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Let me tell you something about Paul. This is in another letter that Paul wrote. He goes, just in case you think I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to suffering and trusting God through suffering, 5 times I've received 40 lashes minus 1. You know what happened to Jesus right before he was hung on the cross? Happened to Paul 5 times. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Rods sounds kind of like little sticks. Okay, these were poles. Once I was stoned. They threw rocks at him, not the other. Wait for it. Okay. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger of the rivers, in danger of bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger of false brothers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have gone often without food. I have been cold and naked. This is the guy who says, look, we have a dilemma of perspective. Our present sufferings, the things that we're going through now, we're never going to even remember as we see God work in our lives and ultimately as we spend eternity with him. Now, that might be easy to say for somebody who's never suffered. Paul has suffered. He's going, what we're going through right now, God is at work. God is doing something. God is going to bring us to himself, and he's going to make it right. And we need to understand that the presence of suffering does not indicate an absence of God. Suffering doesn't always mean nothing's happening, right? When you go to the doctor, has the doctor ever made you suffer? Yeah? Do you ever doubt the doctor? When I was 18, I was playing baseball and I broke my wrist. Slid into third base, stood up, and my hand was like that. Now, when I went to the hospital, they gave me a roll of gauze to chew on as the doctor grabbed my wrist and began yanking it and pulling it, because I had torn all the ligaments and the tendons on this side, and so all the ligaments and tendons on this side were yanking it this way. He's pulling, and I'm like, "Arr!" How ridiculous would it have been if I began yelling, "Why are there no doctors?" The presence of pain does not indicate an absence of God. The presence of suffering does not mean that he's not there. It can mean that he's at work and he's doing what needs to be done. My wrist, I did not want a wrist like this the rest of my life. I needed the doctor to do his job. I needed the doctor to care for me. And while I really would have rather not had this, and at one point I said, "Put me under or shoot me." And the doctor said this, "No, to get it back in place, I'm going to need to talk to you to know what you feel." Not what I wanted. And yet, the presence of pain was the evidence of healing. The presence of pain was the evidence that something was happening. Pain in our life, suffering in our life, does not indicate an absence of God. It doesn't mean that God has abandoned you and forgotten about you and doesn't care about you. Are you willing to acknowledge that you may not have the perspective that God has, and that what God is doing is meant to bring you life? And we don't agree with it all the time. We are sure there must be other ways. Are we willing to consider that what we're going through, God is going to be able to work in and reveal himself in? And not seeing the meaning of suffering does not mean the suffering is meaningless. Just because we don't understand doesn't mean that there's no point. We talked last week, how do you believe in a God you can't see? We believe in things we can't see all the time. We put our faith in things that we don't fully understand. And yet, when it comes to God, this super being in the universe who's supposed to be all-powerful, all-knowing, we think we should be able to figure him out. Not seeing the meaning of the suffering, it doesn't mean that the suffering is meaningless. We are people who want comfort and convenience. I only want to ride downhill. I just do. I'm not even embarrassed to say it. I only want my days in life to be smooth. I want a marriage where I never fight, we never disagree, we are always on the same page. I want kids who say two different things to me. "I love you, Daddy," and "Sure, I'd love to," whenever I ask them to do something. There is benefit. There can be life. There can be hope that comes from pain. And please let me stop right here and say this. Whatever you have going through your mind, whatever scenario, whatever things have happened to you, I am not saying get over it. You know why I would never say that? Because God would never say it. God is not looking at your life and the things that you've had happen and going, get over it. Come on. It's not that big a deal. He realizes it's a big deal. He realizes our hearts break. He realizes we need healing so bad, and that's why he promises to be with us. If he didn't care, he would have gone, earth, life, good luck. Right? God has given us evidence over and over and over again that he cares, that he wants to be part of our lives. Will you come to him in the suffering? Some of you need to shake your fist at God. That's right. You heard that from a pastor. Some of you need to stop the games. You need to stop coming to youth group and putting on a happy face and pretending like everything's okay and nodding your head and only trusting God to hear. God wants to show himself to you. God wants to take all that pent-up hurt and anger and bitterness and confusion and not give you all the answers, not make it so you can fully understand, because we would never fully understand. We would never even fully agree. He wants to give you life. He wants to take all that anger and rage and frustration and give you peace and forgiveness. He wants to take all that sadness and depression and hopelessness and give you a reason to live. And we see evidence of that over and over and over again, especially through Jesus. He's not a character in the Bible. He's God. He came here to show you, I love you this much. And again, this can't be, Jeff says I'm supposed to just, get through this and God's going to do something. And I'm hoping you'll consider this. I'm hoping you'll consider your limited perspective. I'm hoping you'll consider the idea that God may have a plan and may be doing things that you wouldn't understand or agree with even if he told you. And that God will follow through on his promise to never leave you, even in the suffering, to never forget about you. Will you be like Habakkuk? And instead of going, well, if you won't give me an answer, forget it. And instead go, you want me to trust you? Fine. And you climb up on your watchtower and you look for God. I'm telling you to. If I didn't believe this, I would be like, no, don't wait around for God to do something. Because I don't know. I know God will meet you. Will it happen tomorrow? I hope so. But if it doesn't, my faith doesn't go down one little bit that he will meet you. And he can do the impossible. He can do what counselors can't. He can do what medications can't. He can do what youth groups can't. And it doesn't mean we abandon all those other things. It means that we climb up on our watchtower and we go, God, you want me to trust you? Fine. Because the alternative is, I'm not even looking. I'm done. And then you are hopeless. Because you will never be satisfied. And you will never find the answers that you're looking for. God, this is one of the hardest things that we, the people that you say you love, have to endure. And God, I lift up right now the people in this room, especially the ones that have had massive tragedy, that have had huge wrongs done against them. God, those in this room that have been begging for you to reveal what's going on, and it feels like you're silent. I pray that you would open their ears to hear you, and that they would be willing to stop seeking and demanding answers and start seeking and expecting life. So God, we are all here. We are all broken. We are all suffering in some way, and we need you in every aspect of our life. We want you. We want relationship with you. Help us in our unbelief. I pray this believing that you are the God you've promised to be.